Hello, and welcome to our podcast,
Sisters, Not Wives.
I'm your host, Kinsley Hatch.
And I'm Jocelyn Hatch.
For this episode, I thought it would be helpful if we, instead of going into all the little details like we have been doing so far, we looked at Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger, like the first accounts of him practicing plural marriage, or if it was affair, whatever. Sometimes they can get really confusing.
Yeah, especially like last episode, I was like, wait, when did this happen? When did this happen?
Right. The timelines, I feel like even growing up in the church, you are comfortable with certain events, but you don't necessarily know when they happened, and you don't necessarily know the whole story, just because usually you're just learning about the gospel. And so the church stories, like what I'm familiar with, like I remember hearing like pioneer stories and like the extermination order for the saints being kicked out of Missouri, and obviously like Joseph Smith's martyrdom and like the founding of the church, the first vision, all those things were like really core.
Yeah. Oh, and then just also like what times he got arrested.
Yeah,
like a handful of times, right?
Yes, there are a lot of things that happen multiple times, and so that gets really confusing too.
Right.
Yeah, so I figured we would just do a quick, like, shallow timeline to like give a good idea. That way, when we dive into it, we can know, like, because sometimes the topics jump around, and sometimes like what's relevant happens years later. So just giving a general overview, I think will provide some clarity, and then also give us like some building blocks of where to go from there.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
I like that.
Awesome. So
also just how to address your cute little office.
Thank you.
Your cute little podcast setup.
I made it just for us.
That's so much more official. I've got my controversial caffeine for a controversial podcast.
Well, you know what's interesting? What?
I'll try not to burp.
Yeah, that would be a controversial burp. That's not allowed. We would have to censor that.
What were you saying? What was it?
I was saying Greg got a message this morning from his church. It's usually later in the day, but they were doing it at 9 a.m. because they were changing the divides of the ward. And it was really interesting because in the text message, they're like, be there at 9 a.m., like go to bed early tonight so you can be there at 9 a.m., bright and shine, do what you need to do, like go to bed early, drink lots of energy drinks. And they sent that to the whole board.
They said drink energy drinks?
Yeah, it literally says that in the like text that everyone sent out. I was like, wow.
You want to wait for church.
I know. I thought that was funny. Yeah, very interesting. But so I think you're covered, at least for today.
Cool.
You're like, I went to church at 9.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely woke up that early.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I want to hear from you, though. What, like, if you could, let's play a game.
Oh, gosh.
If you could, I remember they did this in Sunday school. They had like 8 events of like, if you can place these church events in order, you got like a truffle bar. And
where is it? Where's the truffle bar?
Oh, I don't have it here. That was for me when I was 14. But so I'll find a prize for you if you can get it right. But
she looks around the room for a prize.
I have some supplements.
Awesome. Need those.
Yes. But I don't have like events, or I was just curious, like if you did have to do a timeline from when the church started to when Joseph Smith got murdered, and then Brigham Young, and after that, what would you like?
Oh my gosh.
I know.
This is why I'm constantly asking, because I literally have no clue. I don't even remember when the church, all I know is Joseph Smith was 14 when he saw the angels. Like that's all I freaking know. And then when did they even, I don't even know when they started to migrate over here, when they settled in Utah. I don't even know when Utah was settled.
Dude, a lot of people, I didn't even know, like I kept having to remind myself and research like when I was looking into all this, because again, it's not really told in like a historical way. It's told in in church, and so you don't really pay attention to the dates.
Yeah, it's like I feel like in church I would always try to be like, okay, they were in what city and what state?
Yeah, it's confusing.
Like that didn't help either.
Yeah,
to try to figure out the timeline.
Well, good thing I didn't get a prize, because that's
true. Dang it.
Just kidding. But I feel like,
how old was he when he died?
He was 38 years old when he died.
Wow. So all this took place within a 17-year span.
Yeah. Okay, so
Like
the
less
church.
than 20 years,
The church was
as
founded.
far as Joseph Smith goes.
Yeah, so the church was founded on April 6th, 1830,
Okay.
with him and like Emma and Oliver Cowdery and like the OG people. It was like 30 people total or something like that. So that was April 6th, 1830. And then he was killed June 27th, 1844. So
Okay.
it all happened in 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, things happened before he officially
Right.
started the church, but that's like when pretty much everything went down.
Because, like, I don't even know the timeline of when he saw, God and the angels versus when he started to go public with.
It was pretty soon after. Like, once he got the visions, he started talking about it, but then it was like, as a teenager, he just kept getting more visions from the angels and instruction and learning more and more. And then, like, he married Emma and the golden plate thing started happening, and then he established the church. And so it all kind of started happening in the, like, late 1820s and 1830s when they started the church.
Okay. For some reason, I thought there was, like, a little pause from the time that he saw the Trinity to.
I mean, there is. He was only 14 when the first vision happened.
Right.
And then all that stuff didn't start going until, like, I mean, he was talking about it, but it was more just like, oh, Joseph Smith is a crazy treasure hunter who says he sees angels and blah, blah, blah. Like, and that's why Emma Smith's dad, or Emma Hale at the time, didn't like him, because he was like, he's this weirdo religious guy who says he sees angels and treasures. Like, he hadn't started church by any means at that point. Right. It wasn't until after he married Emma and got the revelation about the golden plates and started that the church really came into being.
Okay.
Yeah. So the church was founded April 6th, 1830. And then a lot of missionaries start happening, because at that point it was basically like just Joseph Smith and his family and like people they knew and whatever. But once they establish a church, that's when they start like converting people who become really big missionaries and really big figures in church history. So Oliver Cowdery was one of the OGs who were there when the church first was organized. So he goes on a missionary campaign and converts the Pratt brothers, Parley and Orson. Parley, that's what Parley's Canyon is named after, Parley P. Pratt. So he converts them in September of 1830. So April and then September, they're converted. And then a month later in October, Parley P. Pratt and Oliver Cowdery go to Ohio to visit Pratt's former, like, Christian minister who he used to belong to their church. And that was Sidney Rigdon. Have you heard do you know much about Sidney Rigdon?
I talked about him a little bit last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the guy who was, like, after Joseph Smith was killed, he was the person who was supposed to take over, technically. And then Brigham Young, like, took over instead. So Sidney Rigdon, it's really interesting because he was a Christian minister, and, like, that was his livelihood. His family depended on that.
Wow.
And so Oliver Cowdery and Parley P. Pratt came and, like, showed him the Book of Mormon, and he, like, prayed about it with his family and was like, okay, I'm going to leave my like livelihood and be converted to Mormonism. So that happened
That's wild. I will say this, just like whatever you believe, like whether you're in the church or not, just to look at these people and be like, that was some faith. That took like some major, like, life was not easy anyway. And then just to give up whatever little you do have in this life to go be, just uproot your whole life and go be a missionary and do all the things that they were asked to do is really impressive.
It is impressive. And it was definitely such a disruptor. Like, Sidney Rigdon, like, his whole livelihood is suddenly changed. But then, like, the people who stuck it out, and even people who eventually left because of it, it's just like, they faced so much persecution. Like, life was hard. They weren't rich. The ones who were wealthy, like, had their property stolen. So much, like, they were being persecuted, they were being mobbed, they were getting kicked out of their houses over and over and over again. And these were just like families that were trying to do the right thing and trying to survive and going off of like spiritual promptings that they felt, just trying to do the right thing.
And just wanted to kind of have their religious freedom.
Yeah, honestly.
Country was based off of,
Right. And I think a lot of them, like, once they came to Utah with Brigham Young, the attitude changed a little. Like, people started feeling more aggressive, especially towards the federal government, just because.
And they'd had enough at that point.
It's like, we've literally been killed.
Their limits.
Yeah. And so they were like, we're leaving. We're letting you die and we hate you. But yeah, I will say, even like some of the characters who their stories take certain turns that I think are a little sketchy. Like Orson Pratt has a really interesting story. He's the person who Brigham Young chooses to reveal the polygamy revelation in 1852. And we'll get into that. But he has a super sad story with polygamy and like his first wife and what happens to him with the church.
Okay.
Like before any of that
I feel
happens.
like I have like a vague recollection of that, but I can't wait to hear it. Yeah.
I never heard that story till recently.
Okay, maybe I don't. We'll see.
But maybe you have. I don't know. It's out there, you know?
We'll see.
Yeah. So even people who it's like, at the end of the day, they did things that I think are like unethical or whatever, like still. There's a lot to, and that's what I love about history is it's not one-sided. It's not a done deal. It's not black and white. It's not like, even though I like have my own like biases, it's like, it's not like all these people are righteous and good and all these people are evil and bad, you know, it's all mixed.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's fun to talk about.
Are too. Like everything's not black and white.
Right. And I think that's why it's really important to look at this. I feel like it's really easy with church history, and not just like the LDS Church, but church history in general, to try to, and honestly, even governments do it, but just try to whitewash history to make you look good or to like not bring up controversy. And to make it look like, and to make it look established too. It's
interesting too, because religion in and of itself kind of has that black and white lens. But it's like, it's just not, this is not what life is.
It's not. And I feel like religion is in a way harder spot than a government is. Because like if a government is like racist or whatever, they could be like, oh yeah, that's because there was racist people living at the time and we fixed that and we're trying to fix this systemic problems or whatever, you know. But like with religion, it's a little harder to backtrack, and that's why it's harder for religion to change, because
it's like, oh, so God wasn't telling you this stuff all along?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like you've always claimed authority to God. So
morality is supposed to be unchangeable, right?
Right. God's supposed to be unchangeable. So at what point did that change?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's actually one of the core questions with polygamy that so many people struggle with is, it really, like a lot of people are like, I don't even want to talk about polygamy. It happened in the past. It doesn't affect my life now, how I live my religion, blah, 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 blah. But I think there's like some key principles and some key concepts where when people start looking at it, it really does kind of shake your faith a little bit, because you're like, wait a second, if this is the God I believe in who would do ABC, like I really don't believe in a God who would do A, B, and C back then. Yeah. So how can I believe in that God now, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like we have to be really careful. Like a lot of people are just like, just shut up about it. But I think it's so important to talk about, because I think a lot of people lose their faith when they could have kept it and had it and like expanded it and have it be beautiful, instead of just feeling like, oh, these people were racist and pedophiles and like, and then I'm just supposed to believe that's okay and leave, you know? Like, and obviously I'm simplifying it. There's a lot of complex things why people stay and leave, but that's for me one of the biggest reasons why I like looking into polygamy, because it's way more nuanced, and I think it's important to discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, where were we? Sydney
Timeline. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
I believe we're not going to get very far into the time.
No, I actually love this. I was like,
which is fine.
No, I like it, because I was worried that we were just going to like go through the dates real quick and then be like,
jokes on us. We got through 2 dates.
I know. Yeah. So that happened in November 1830, and so people.
What happened? They got converted.
Yeah, Sidney Rigdon gets converted by Parley P. Pratt and Oliver Cowdery.
Okay.
And his whole family does. And then missionary efforts are just continuing to expand as these people get converted and then just want to preach the gospel and yada, yada. So Samuel H. Smith, who is Joseph Smith's brother, is also a really big missionary during this time. He goes to the East Coast. I mean, they are in the East Coast, but he goes along the East Coast. preaching the gospel and handing out Book of Mormons and things like that. And he is actually responsible for converting Brigham Young because he gave a Book of Mormon to Brigham Young's brother, Phineas Howe Young, who gave it to Brigham Young. And that's Brigham Young's whole conversion story is he got the Book of Mormon. He like pondered it for I think like a year, read through it and stuff. And then he's like, I have to meet Brigham Young, or I have to meet Joseph Smith. And then he met Joseph Smith and was like, okay, yeah, that's true.
Big mistake.
Fucking mistake, Samuel. I know. Well, it's actually interesting because Samuel Smith's death, there's some questionable ties to how he died that kind of come back to some of these people. So, yeah.
Careful about who you let into your life. For real.
It's crazy. So Brigham Young, they were very influential because there was a lot of them. And so they created...
There still are.
Yes. Yeah, polygamy just made that even more. But even before polygamy, there was a lot of them. They lived in Mendon, New York. And so like an LDS branch was established there because they had so many converts. And it was composed of 15 families. And 8 of those families were Youngs. Dang. So they were the majority of the branch in that area. And Brigham Young also one of the most influential leaders, in my opinion, in early church history. Besides Brigham Young is Heber C. Kimball. And Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball were like lifelong friends who grew up together. And Brigham Young's the one who converted Heber C. Kimball. So Brigham Young was baptized on April 6th, 1832, which is interesting because April 6th is like, that's literally on the anniversary of the founding of the church 2 years later.
I have kind of a dumb random question real quick.
Yeah.
With the Book of Mormon, when was that translated? Like, when was that completed?
It was before all this.
Okay.
So
they were working on translating it, and then they got done with it, and then that's kind of when they started converting people.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's how Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith became buddies because Oliver Cowdery heard about Joseph Smith and he met him, and Emma was the one doing all the like scribing of the Book of Mormon for him, but she was pregnant. And so he's like, oh, let me take over. And so that's how so that was all happening before.
Gotcha. Okay.
So like they got married. There was rumors of the gold plates. They got, like all that kind of stuff happened before because the Book of Mormon was a really important and still is a really important tool for missionary work. You know? So
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that's what mostly the missionary work
was. It took them
was.
quite a while to finish it, though, right?
It was actually pretty. I mean, there was little hiccups like the Martin Harris losing the 116 papers, and like they had to be careful about like people trying to get the golden plates from him. But actually, the actual time from him starting the translation, like. People quote it all the time in the church. I'll have to find the exact number, but it's actually pretty quick. I think it was like in a span of 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of people will use that as a testimony to the Book of Mormon being true. Like Joseph Smith, this uneducated farmer, could not have written this huge, even if you think it's not real, like this huge chronological history in 3 months. Like no one, like it had to be inspired. That's a big point that people say. Yeah. Brigham Young's converted in 1832 in April 6th, and then Heber C. Kimball is converted like 10 days later on April 16th. And then this is a lot of this timeline is like according to what the church narrative generally is. I'll try to point out like where anti-Mormons differ, or I'm trying to think of a better name for anti-Mormons.
Just members or
I think non-members is a good one. Okay, so the missionary work is all happening in the like early 1830 to 1832. It's like really taking off. And then this is the official church narrative, but they're not definite about it, but it is just speculation based on later things that happen with polygamy. But they say, while translating some of the Old Testament, because Joseph Smith was working on that project too after the Book of Mormon, like retranslating the Old Testament to be more correct.
Okay.
And so the narrative is that Joseph Smith came upon the stories of like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were like patriarchs in the church and were prophets and were these super influential people in the Book of Mormon, in the Bible. And he's like, oh, this is really interesting. These men of God practice polygamy. The story goes that he prayed to God to ask him, like, what is this deal with polygamy? Like if these people were practicing it, what's up with it? And so the narrative says like God revealed to him at that time Actually, yes, polygamy is an eternal principle that connects with celestial marriage. And then it was told to Joseph Smith that he would be expected to eventually practice polygamy, but the time wasn't right yet. And so to hold off on it, not practice polygamy yet, but that eventually he'll be required to practice polygamy and also teach other, like, select few people about polygamy as well to practice it and bring it into the new dispensation. So there's no documentation about that story at all, but based on
like what the church says.
yeah, based on like the revelation, which is allegedly the revelation that Joseph Smith got later about polygamy, it talks about it, like the Abrahamic covenant and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that gets brought up a lot in the revelation. And so the speculation is, oh, well, this is how it all came to be. He prayed about it. And I think the revelation even says that. But so based on the revelation, that's where the story is coming from. But there's no like historical documentation, and there's no like actual dating of when this whole experience happened. But we do know that he was translated the Old Testament in 1831. And so they're like sometime around then. He got, like, what the church usually says, how they phrase it on like the church website and stuff is like, he could have had this revelations about polygamy as early as 1831. He could have known about polygamy. So there's that.
He could have known about it.
Or like it could have been revealed to him as early as 1831. And he could have started practicing it as early as 1831.
So for the Abraham, Isaac, all the polygamy stories, were those originally in the whatever Bible he was translating, or no? Or was it just when he started translating them that he was like, oh, wait a second?
Yeah, so those stories of those men practicing polygamy are in the Bible.
Okay, that's what I thought. It was just when he was translating it. He was like, what's up with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, I mean, in my perspective, I'm like, that's kind of interesting that suddenly in 1831 he'd be concerned about it, because he clearly had read the Bible all his life.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And he literally like had the first vision because he was praying about the Bible. But we'll
like,
talk about stuff like that
I
later.
mean, like, in those stories, it is just kind of like a little like, oh yeah, and then his other wife. But,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it gets talked about a little bit more, but it is kind of just like the side part of the main stories that happen in the Bible.
Right.
So.
Like the 12 tribes of Israel stem from polygamy, so that's a big part. But it's not so much dwelling on the polygamy as the gospel. But we'll do it. I think it'd be beneficial to do an episode on like the theological arguments, because I think it's really interesting, and the theological proofs as well.
Yeah.
Because like what people who don't believe in polygamy say is, oh, well, yeah, those men, God didn't command those men. In the Bible, it doesn't say God commanded them to practice polygamy. The men just did it because it was a bajillion years ago, and that was their culture.
Right.
But it doesn't say that God commanded them to. Whereas people who believe in polygamy and like based on the revelation.
This revelation is by God.
Yeah, it's like, no, they were commanded by God to practice polygamy, and it's actually tied to celestial marriage.
Interesting.
So, yeah, those are kind of the two viewpoints for people who are looking at polygamy from a theological viewpoint. Yeah. So that happens in the background. There's no evidence for it till later, but if that happened the way it did, that's when it would have happened, 1831. And then like the church is being founded, yada yada. And then in what we talked about last time, Fanny Alger and Joseph Smith, that happened again. This is considered his first plural marriage, or non-members would consider it an affair, like extra outside of marriage affair that he had with Fanny Alger. And again, there is documentation about people talking about it, but there's no like concrete knowing when this happened. But the time frame is sometime between 1835 to 1836, because that's when Fanny Alger lived with the Smiths.
Okay.
And so that happens in 1835, 1836 time frame. And then throughout the 1830s and the early 1840s, missionary work, the church is growing a ton. Like this is the main part of the church story when Joseph Smith is still alive, is between the 1830s to the early 1840s. So a lot of missionary work is being done. Missionary work spreads, like they do effort to go convert the Lamanites, aka the Native Americans. They like send people to.
How did that go?
Interesting. There's some interesting stories even about polygamy that we can go into. But so lots of missionary work throughout like the States and the US, and then also they start sending people to Europe. Like Brigham Young spends a full year in England, and Heber C. Kimball is on a mission in England. John Taylor goes to Europe.
Pratts were always out there.
Yeah, the Pratts were big missionaries. So this is just happening, and then they're getting persecuted. Like this is when all the main stories that we know of the church are happening during the 1830s to early 1840s. One thing that is important to know if you're looking at it from a polygamy standpoint is publicly all missionaries denied the existence of polygamy as a church belief throughout the 1830s and 1840s.
Okay.
So, because there's rumors of Mormons practicing polygamy, and there's
just kind of funny full circle. I bet our missionaries, well, I know our missionaries that are out now, I'm sure they get those questions.
All the time. It's kind of sad that the like LDS Church has been defined. Like that's the main thing that outsiders know about the church.
It's so true.
It's like
sad.
Yeah, because like as members, it is kind of something we just kind of shush and don't want to talk about. But nowadays, it's not really something that's in our lives.
Yep.
And so the fact that that's all they know is really interesting because, now missionaries have it on the other side. We don't practice it anymore, but people think we do. And but there's lots of rumors, and there's certain events that trigger that. That we'll get into that trigger the rumors and trigger the like polygamy. Like, is this happening? Is it not happening? But like the official church stance for all the missionaries was like, no, we are not practicing polygamy. Do not tell people that we are. Even though, according to like the church narrative, Joseph Smith was starting to practice polygamy and was teaching a select few, like men and women in the church, that they could practice polygamy too. It wasn't widespread, and it wasn't universal, but it was happening during this time.
Okay.
Kind of going back, so in Kirkland, Ohio, that's where the first temple is built. So the saints settle in Kirkland, and they start building the temple in 1833, and then a big part that leads to a lot of like a big apostasy in the church. I would say probably the first big apostasy in the church is the Kirkland Society bank failing. There's like a financial crisis that happened in 1837, and Joseph Smith had started a bank to try to help help the people in the church monetarily and help the church monetarily because there's a lot of debt building.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people invested into this bank being like, oh, well, it's like the prophet of God. Of course, it's going to be safe, like a secure investment. And so when it failed in 1837, a lot of people lost their testimonies, and a lot of people blamed Joseph Smith for ruining their lives, and not just Joseph Smith, like other leaders in the church. But so that was like created a lot of bad blood in the church and led to a lot of people apostatizing. So that happened in 1837.
Apostasizing. Yeah. Such a serious word.
Apostasizing.
It almost sounds like a delicious Italian cuisine.
Tonight on the menu, we will have the pasta size with a side of pesto.
Large apostasize.
Size. Biggest pasta size you've ever seen.
Stupid, okay.
That's funny. What were we talking about? I'm just thinking about pasta now.
No, I'm just thinking about pasta and breadsticks.
Dang it.
Okay, sorry. That's the bank. The bank?
Oh, yeah. So the bank fails, and then that increases, like, criticism of the church, and polygamy rumors start happening even more. Like, Joseph Smith sucks. He stole all our money, and he has multiple wives. And
stole money in our lives.
What?
Money in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, those are two big things.
Money, hide your wives.
Yeah, for real. That's how they felt. And so, anyway, things do not end well in Kirkland for the saints, so they have to leave, and then they go to Nauvoo in Illinois, and they settle in Nauvoo in 1839. And then the Nauvoo Temple cornerstone is laid by Joseph Smith.
Sorry. Going back to the timeline thing, you said they went to Kirkland in 33?
That's what, I mean, they were like forming before that, but they started the building of the temple in Kirkland in 1833.
And then they got kicked out and went to Nauvoo in 39.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then the Nauvoo Temple cornerstone was laid by Joseph Smith on April 6th, 1841, 11 years after the founding of the church.
Wow.
The Nauvoo Temple is not completed in Joseph Smith's lifetime. He gets killed before that happens. So, but he starts it, and they're working on the building of the temple this whole time.
Wait, they made a temple in Kirtland too? Wait, yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And that one got burned down, right?
No, so there were attempts. There was like an arsonist attempt in 1838, but the Kirtland Temple never got burned down. It just changed hands between the RLDS Church and the LDS Church.
Well, the RLDS Church had it for a long time. Like this year, the RLDS Church sold it to the LDS Church.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was like this big news thing. So
That's so interesting.
it is so interesting. And that's what I love is like there's little snippets of this, like of how this applies happening now.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the relationship between the RLDS Church and the LDS Church.
The
And that's
history
something,
there.
yeah.
The history with that building.
And that's what we'll get in. Like, that's another reason I want to talk about the timeline is because a lot of people are confused about like RLDS, FLDS, LDS.
Yeah, well, we were confused.
Yeah.
We didn't, like, really know the difference till a couple of years ago.
And so
We're looking into it.
that's the cool thing looking at the timeline. You're like, oh, this is how this, like these people formed, these people formed. And it makes so much sense if you understand the history of it. But yeah. So that happened earlier this year. And then, so they're in Nauvoo, the temple, the cornerstone is laid 1841. And then the narrative is that Joseph Smith is trying to follow the revelation from God to practice polygamy all during this time. But it's on and off because Emma gets ticked, you know?
I'm so sorry. The fanning thing happened when again? It was like late 30s?
It was mid, so 1835 to 1836, sometime within then.
Okay. Man, that whole thing. I like already want to go back and re-listen to that whole thing because that was very interesting.
It is so interesting. A lot of these
Like
stories.
Emma's record versus all the other hearsay. And
Yeah. And that's why, like, it's claimed that polygamy wasn't taught, or Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy for a couple years after that because it was like a traumatic experience for everyone involved. You know, he's like, Emma got so angry, like it did not end well. And so it's kind of like Joseph Smith was on and off trying to practice it and teach people about it because of Emma and because it was illegal and he was already having legal issues with the government and he's already like going to jail and all this crap. And so like God kept being like, you need to practice polygamy, you need to practice polygamy. And he's like, not now, I have other things happening. And,
lay low.
yeah, or he would try, like, and that, so on and off throughout this time trying to figure out what to do about polygamy. But allegedly Joseph Smith was like carefully choosing certain people to teach the principles of plural marriage in the church to secretly practice it, because there are records of people starting to practice polygamy in the church during this time. Joseph Smith's technically his first official marriage, besides the Fanny Alger one, that we don't really have any documentation of their actual marriage. We just have the like accounts of people hearing that they got married. Like the first official plural marriage was in Nauvoo to a woman, Louisa Beeman, on April 5th, 1841. So this whole time, he's like struggling with it, but not really practicing it, but he's teaching people, but not taking any additional wives after Fanny Alger. But then April 1841 is when his first official marriage happens. And then, but he dies in 1844. So between this time, that's where it's said that he marries like 30 plus women.
Where do you have the time?
I know, right?
Run a church. Like you killed or go to jail.
I know.
Still in jail.
I know. It's
Okay,
crazy.
and this is according to like, is this what the church says specifically? Yes. Okay.
And like non-church members generally agree with this as well.
Okay.
The only big
Rare
disagreement,
moment where there's a rare moment where there's some mutual agreement.
yeah, well, that's the interesting thing. A lot of non-member and church like beliefs are actually really the same thing.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
with timeline and the history of it, of like what actually happened. What they differ on is what is right and what is okay. And like the morality of it and what we should believe.
Yeah.
Like obviously non-members don't believe that the Book of Mormon is an inspired document. And so it's like theologically and morally is where they disagree. But the history of it, they pretty much agree on most things.
Yeah.
which is interesting.
Well, but there's a lot of like, I hear a lot of like Joseph Smith just being a con artist and just doing it for money.
Yes.
And stuff like that.
Yes.
So,
Right.
yeah, which goes along, I guess, with the morality of it all.
Right. A lot of non-Mormons who are against the church do think that, like, think he was like, if they don't think he was a pedophile, they think he was a con artist. He was just like a treasure hunter, or he just made up the Book of Mormon, or he's just trying to get power. Like, he did run for president. He was clearly like a maniac, just trying to like think he could.
Oh, wait, sorry. He ran for president.
You didn't know that?
No!
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So in the 1840s, he did run. He was trying to run for president of the United States.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So a lot of people who are not in the church are like, this guy is crazy. He's like the Kanye West of 1843. You know?
No, that's actually pretty wild.
Right. Yeah. And like valid on both ends. Like, yeah. So, but the polygamy thing all happens like according to the church narrative and what other people say too, besides like Fanny Alger. And there are like random accounts of be like, this woman said that Joseph Smith was sexually involved with her, but like that's super unfounded. Like Fanny Alger is really the main one that has any kind of backing to it. And then once he starts marrying women in 1840s, that's when it picks up. So he has his first marriage to Louisa Beaman in April of 1841. And then from 1841 to August of 1842, it's believed Joseph married 16 women.
Ooh,
So he really like up to the
busy.
ante. Yeah.
Busy man.
Yeah. I know. That's like,
That's what the church says.
yeah, that's what the church says.
I just cannot wrap my head around like where do you get the time?
I know.
You get the time. I don't get it.
Yeah.
Got a lot going on.
It's true. There is a lot going on. And some of these stories that these, like the people who are involved in these plural marriages are pretty elaborate, you know, about what was going on.
That's wild. Unless there's just like a quick little like, hey, hi, you cute. You want to get married?
Right.
And people are like, oh yeah, sure. Sounds cool.
Yeah.
Like maybe like fangirl situation. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure.
No, I think those are all things that you start to think about. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because some of these women were married to other men.
Yeah.
And some, like, there's a lot of tricky
and the church
situations.
acknowledges that part too.
We'll get into it because it's kind of
Okay.
complex.
Because that's a whole other can of worms, I feel like.
Yeah, well, and the church has a very strict policy that like polygamy was allowed, men being able to marry multiple women, but women married to multiple men was not cool.
Right.
And so with the women who were married to another man at the time, no, the church doesn't. Like, we'll go into the actual details of what the church says happened between those people.
Yeah. I feel like that's some nitty gritty details.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. I actually love those stories. So, and then I want to spend a episode on this because this guy is so fascinating. But this guy, John C. Bennett, comes to town and he becomes the mayor of Nauvoo, and he creates this whole huge scandal with him seducing women and saying Joseph Smith said he could, and like all the, yeah, it's crazy.
Spicy.
Yeah. And so like, it's not plural marriage. What he's preaching is like spiritual wifery, which is like, okay, we can have sex, just don't tell anyone. And Joseph Smith said it's okay. Like and people find out about it. And so he gets reprimanded a couple times by Joseph Smith. Just was like, dude, you cannot do that. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I will not do that again. But then he does. And then he eventually gets like, he runs away from Nauvoo because of all the drama he created. But he's so angry at Joseph Smith. And we'll get into all the details, but this...
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, this one is a really juicy one, actually. And it's a really big factor that leads to like Joseph Smith's martyrdom and what happens with polygamy.
Oh,
because
interesting.
he writes a book. John C. Bennett writes a whole book trying to defame Joseph Smith and trying to say, like, expose him for practicing spiritual wifery or polygamy or whatever. And then he starts talking to newspapers, and that's when like a ton of polygamy rumors start going out about Joseph Smith, and people are getting really angry. So that's a really big
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that at all.
Really? Yeah, I had never heard about it either, honestly. Like, it's not something people talk about, but it's really important because, like, that was one of Joseph Smith's
Like a ripple effect.
It is a ripple effect, and it directly affects what happens to Joseph Smith at the end. Like, it created a ton of contention from John C. Bennett. And also just the fact that John C. Bennett was seducing women at the same time that Joseph Smith was allegedly practicing polygamy. Like, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
But because of this, well, it's speculated. There's a 5-month period. So Joseph Smith marries like 16 women within like, what is that? May, June, July, like 15 months or something between 1841 to 1842. But then there's a 5-month period where he doesn't marry anyone. The speculation is because it's right after John C. Bennett. And so he stops like practicing polygamy because he's just trying to like damage control what John C. Bennett did. But then, so there's no documented marriages from 1840 from within that 5-month period. And then he starts up again in 1843. So from 1843 to his death in June 1844, it's believed he married like 21 more women.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing. You would think he would be doing it like slowly throughout the church, but it really was 1841
spurts
to 1844. He married around 30 plus women.
That's wild.
So that's what the church says.
That's wild.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's like, oh, that's pretty crazy considering everything else that was happening to Joseph during the 1840s. Like you said, like, how did he have time to do it? Because that's when things were heating up and things were getting kind of crazy, you know? So all during this time, there's no official revelation on polygamy that's been revealed. But what, like, Brigham Young claimed, what the church says now and what the revelation says is that the official revelation for polygamy happened in 1843 on July 12th is when Joseph Smith wrote it down. And that's what's now section 132 in D&C. But this revelation didn't emerge publicly until 1852 in Utah, 8 years after Joseph Smith died. Yeah, that's a super interesting story that we'll get into as well. Because Brigham Young, pretty much, he's like, they hold a special conference and he like pulls out this piece of paper. He's like, I've been logging this in my desk for 8 years and now I'm going to share it with you.
Been waiting for a moment.
Yes. Yeah. So that allegedly happens July 12th, 1843. And then the Nauvoo Expositor is a newspaper that...
Expositor? Okay.
That starts in Nauvoo by several disenfranchised members of the church, like people who are angry at Joseph Smith and like put off by the church. And they start publishing anti-Mormon newspapers against Joseph Smith and the church. The Nauvoo High Council, along with Joseph Smith, are like, we got to stop that. And so they vote to burn the press down.
Burn it down.
And Joseph Smith signs off on it. And so it's burned on June 10th, 1844. And then that's why Joseph Smith gets arrested for the burning down of the press. And that's where he's taken to Carthage, where he's murdered by the mob along with his brother Hiram. And other people are there too, like John Taylor and all that are in the jail with them, but they survive. Hiram and Joseph are the ones who get killed.
Get into that too.
Yeah, so we will. So Joseph Smith is killed June 27th, 1844, along with Hiram Smith. And then Sidney Rigdon is next in line, and he's trying to take over the leadership of the church. But then Brigham Young, he's off. I think he was helping with the presidential campaign in the East Coast at this time. And so he hears Joseph Smith dies, comes back to Nauvoo where everyone is, and basically says Sidney Rigdon is of the devil and is an imposter, and they kick him out, and Brigham Young takes over.
I just, the visual in my head for that is just like, but I know, like, finger up and be like, no.
Sidney Rigdon's like, I think I am. And they're like, shut up. Get out of here. It's kind of sad. Like,
it's sad.
And Sidney Rigdon, like, they all went through a lot of persecutions, but Sidney Rigdon went through some big persecutions too. Like, he got tarred and feathered, and there's this account of where a mob is dragging him out from his house, where his head is like banging against these like stone stairs, and he has huge health repercussions for the rest of his life for what happened to him. So I feel really bad for Sidney Rigdon, honestly.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Quorum of the 12, like, Brigham Young isn't officially the prophet at this point. He just takes over, like, leading the Quorum of the 12. And that's what Sidney Rigdon was trying to do. And he's like, no, you're not the leader of the 12. I am. And so the Quorum of the 12, technically there's no prophet after Joseph Smith dies. The Quorum of the 12 leads the church until Brigham Young is officially made president of the church in 1847. And then in 1847, that's when they make the first trek to Utah, and Brigham Young leads everyone to Utah.
In
1847, yeah. So 3 years after Joseph Smith is killed.
Dang.
Yeah. And then, so Brigham Young leads the church, and this is where the first schism happens with the RLDS Church coming into being, because Emma Smith, like, is not on good terms with Brigham Young, does not like him. They have tiffs. Emma Smith does not acknowledge him as the rightful successor to the church. And she says Joseph Smith gave a blessing to her son, saying that he would be the next prophet. And she doesn't believe in polygamy. And there's, like, financial disputes. There's a lot. And so another church is formed based on people who agree with Emma Smith and who don't want to go to Utah and who don't believe in polygamy. So they all stay back and form the RLDS Church. And they stay.
And not to be confused with the FLDS Church.
Right.
That's what I think.
Yes, that's what I always confuse too. Yeah. So the RLDS Church has never practiced polygamy, is super against polygamy, and is founded in Joseph and Emma Smith's family and their posterity, and the people who believed Emma and stayed with her instead of Brigham Young.
Are we going to get into, like, all the Utah history, too?
Which is so fascinating.
I know, just, like, the little tidbits that you already shared with me. I'm like, I can't wait to get
Utah history is so fascinating, which is hilarious because I used to think it was the most boring thing in the world. I was like, I would rather die than take a class on the history of Utah.
Yeah, for real. And I feel like that's what most people would think, honestly.
Yeah, like Utah?
Like, okay, the Mormons came here, they said all the... What to do. Like, a few weird things happen.
Yeah, but no, it's super fascinating. So we're almost done. So Brigham Young, because he is practicing polygamy and trying to get away from the federal government, the whole time he's in Utah, there's problems with the federal government because Brigham Young is pretty much trying to establish his Zion and, like, lead the church and, like, have their own society outside of the U.S. because they were getting persecuted. And the federal government's like, no, that's still our land, bro. You can't do that. And then there's rumors of them practicing polygamy, which still they're denying. They're like, we're not practicing polygamy. And people are like, yes, they are. And so, and so they deny that they're practicing polygamy this whole time until that special conference I mentioned from August 28th to August 29th of 1852, where Brigham Young announces that he has the revelation from Joseph Smith about polygamy, which is section 132. And Orson Pratt is the one who publicly announces that, like, at the end of that conference. So another thing we'll get into is why they did that and the timing of why they announced it publicly.
Okay.
In Utah, they just struggle with the federal government and try to build up a society, and there's a lot to that. And then in the 1860s, the RLDS Church is like, we're sending missionaries to Utah. And so, so that creates...
Spice it up.
That creates a huge, like, cultural turmoil stage where missionaries from the RLDS Church are coming to Utah saying Joseph Smith ever practiced polygamy, like saying all these interesting things.
And probably saying something like, we pretty much believe most of everything you believe except the crap that you don't like.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it does cause people to be like, what? And it is definitely a threat to like the people who are in Utah who really do believe in that. And so that creates a big stir. And then in 1890, Wilford Woodruff is the prophet. So it's Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and then John Taylor, and then Wilford Woodruff. And so by this time, 1890, Wilford Woodruff, that's kind of a hard name. I know. That's when he releases the first manifesto, which officially ends polygamy because of what was going on with the federal government and them at the time.
So the time that they officially released it is when again?
1890. Because they were trying to get statehood.
1890? Is when they announced that it ended.
Yeah.
Okay. But from the time that Brigham Young was like, here's this little thing, that was like in the 50s?
1852.
Wow. So that's pretty... Why they practiced for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
Dang, that's wild.
Yeah, so it was publicly practiced before that, and then allegedly Joseph and a select few were practicing it, like, 10 or so years. But, well, I guess longer because Jeff Smith was dead for a while. So like 15-ish years before that.
I'm so curious too about when it ended, like what happened there. Like,
yeah, so the first manifesto, they were like, we're stopping it so they could get statehood and like calm the relationship they had with the federal government, but they were still secretly authorizing people to have plural marriages, and they were still doing that in the church. So a second manifesto had to come out. So the first manifesto was in 1890, but they were still secretly marrying people. And then in 1904, the second manifesto came out that was like, okay, stop. If anyone practices plural, like if anyone does plural marriage moving forward, you're going to get excommunicated. And that's when the church was actually serious about it in 1904.
it's so wild to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild to me that they can't admit that it might have like certain, I don't know, get controversial later.
What?
They can't admit like certain mistakes that were made. So like the church like strongly shies away from that kind of thing. But then they're like, hey, we were telling you to do this one thing. And now if you do not stop what we were telling you to do, you're going to get excommunicated.
Right. Well, and it's because it's not just like you can't drink coffee anymore. It's like you started a family with multiple people, and now we're saying you can't do that anymore. Like that's
and like how did that end? Like
right.
All these like wives just have to go like be single mothers now.
A lot of the times the husband would pick a wife and be like, okay,
That's really
all
sad.
the other wives, bye. You know,
It's really sad.
it is really sad.
Well, especially like if you think about like the church, like what it stands for, which is the family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like families can be together forever, and then really it just kind of causes okay.
Well, and that's what convinced a lot of people to practice polygamy is they said, like, you cannot receive exaltation to the highest degree unless you enter polygamy. The church does not preach that now by any means. But back then, the leaders were telling people that, like, you cannot get to heaven if you do not practice polygamy.
Wow.
And then in their same lifetime, they're told, you are going to get excommunicated if you practice polygamy, you know?
And you have to go restart your life a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It has material consequences as well as spiritual.
Yeah.
So, and that's how the FLDS Church.
I've never even thought about that aspect of it, of when it was going to when it ended and what that looked like.
Yeah, and what the reality of what that was for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's super crazy.
Yeah, it's like definitely crazy. And that's how the FLDS Church was founded, because it was a bunch of people being like, no, like, we don't believe you.
We're used to this now.
Yeah, it's like, no, you said polygamy was of God and it was the law of celestial marriage. We're going to continue to practice that because we believe that that's true. And you can't just tell it, go like, reminds me of the Michael Scott office. You can't go back and forth, snip, snap, snip, snap. You have no idea the toll that takes on a man. But that's how the FLDS Church started. Is there is a community of polygamist Mormons.
They really did not want to give up anything either. They're like, we like the way we dress right now. We're going to hang on to that.
We're never changing our style. For real.
So interesting.
Yeah. So the FLDS Church was polygamist families who were like, nope, we're going to continue to do it. And one of the most popular ones is a group of polygamist members who were in Arizona in a place called Short Creek. And Brigham Young came and gave a speech when he was still living to Short Creek. And in it, he said Short Creek would become the head and the tail of the church, and that it would be a really special place. And so people are like, okay, what the church leaders are saying, they're going against the word of God. Short Creek is where the church is now going to be, and we're going to continue with the true word of God, which is polygamy. And so Short Creek, they had their own community there, and that's where Colorado City is in Arizona.
Oh,
So that polygamous city.
that's very confusing.
I know, it went through names. I know Colorado City in Arizona, that was called
From a
Short Creek.
church that was from Utah.
Yeah. But that's how Colorado City came to be. And it was led by a man, John Y. Barlow. And eventually that's where Warren Jeffs came to be.
No.
So that's the background of the FLDS Church.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So
There's so much. There's so much to get into. I feel like sometimes it's kind of hard to not jump all over the place in these episodes. Because I'm like, wait, what about this?
I know.
What about this?
Yes, I feel that exact same way. But I think it's really good that we did this timeline because now you kind of know.
Yeah. I think it would be really interesting too. Maybe, like, tell me, we can cut this out if you don't want to. But if we did like a question and answer kind of like episode or something.
Wait, what'd you call it?
A mini-sode, like a mini episode.
Yeah, no, I think that would be really cool. I've thought about different ways.
The discussion a little bit more.
Make it interactive and have it be based on what people are actually like questioning or researching or something like that.
Yeah.
I think we totally should.
Good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this podcast too, is to open a conversation that maybe hasn't been approached in this way.
Right. Yeah, I think we 100% should do that.
Okay, cool. Yep. Sorry, I didn't know if you were done with your
No, you're good. That's the full timeline from the lens of polygamy. So there you have it. Yeah, so our next episodes will actually go into like the juicy details of the individual stories.